As Hannah looked at Brock, she was reminded of her diagnosis. She knew Brock wanted children, and she couldn't give him any. She became more determined to cut ties with him. Okay, I'm sorry. I admit I know you, but you have no business being here. We're divorced now. She lifted Ezra's hand. As you can see, I'm happily involved with someone. You need to stop chasing me. That's right. Hannah's mine now. We've been dating for quite some time, and we're planning on getting married soon. We have her parents' blessing, so I hope you didn't come here to cause trouble. Brock froze when Ezra mentioned Hannah's parents. He clearly remembered their cold reception when he had taken her back to their apartment after she had sprained her ankle. I can't believe her parents would agree to her tying the knot with some dirtbag musician, he thought. He felt like someone had ripped his heart out and stomped on it. He tightened his grip on the bouquet of roses he had bought for Hannah and pricked his finger on a thorn. He looked down to see his finger was bleeding, but he ignored it and looked at Hannah angrily. Do you remember the day I showed you the house I bought, Han? She pursed her lips and said nothing. And do you remember that time in the hospital when I told you to be patient and wait for me until I sorted things out? She stared at him silently, feeling his pain. I thought that if I worked hard and broke off my engagement, we could finally be together again. I was convinced you felt the same way after that night in Aruba, but then you disappeared again, and I was busy with work. I get about 3 or 4 hours of sleep at night, Han. Did you know that? I finally had a canceled meeting today, so I came to see you and ask you out to dinner. I'm leaving tomorrow at the crack of dawn. He crossed his arms. I thought you'd be happy to see me, but clearly, I was wrong. Hannah was trembling now, still holding on to Ezra's hand. Brock threw the bouquet of flowers on the floor and stepped on it. You made a fool out of me, Hannah. I thought you loved me, but you're dating this jerk. He turned to Ezra. Did you know you almost got her killed? Ezra was stunned. No, what are you talking about? I'd never do anything to hurt her. Brock laughed bitterly. I guess you didn't tell him, did you, Hannah? Tell me what? What happened, Hannah? Tears welled up in Hannah's eyes. It was a few months ago, the morning after our concert in New York. A group of crazy fans confronted me. They threw me to the ground and threatened me. Brock showed up and saved me in the nick of time. Ezra shook his head sympathetically. I'm so sorry, Han. I had no idea. Why didn't you tell me about this? Now I know why you want to quit the band. It's not just that. I simply don't have what it takes to be a singer. Brock stared at them, trying to hold back his anger. He thought if he stayed another minute, he would rip Ezra to shreds, so he stomped off without saying another word. Hannah pulled her hand away from Ezra's and forced a smile. Thanks for that. I owe you one. He lowered his eyes. I'm so sorry about everything. If I only knew. It's okay. It happened a while ago and I'm fine now. I just don't want something like that to happen again. Like I said, the entertainment industry isn't for me. I'm perfectly happy without millions of followers. I'm sure most of my fans have already forgotten about me. I feel like this is all my fault. I promise not to drag you into this in the future. If we meet again, it'll be a quiet, remote place where no one can find us. That would be great. Hannah, I hope you don't mind my saying, but I think your ex-husband's really in love with you. I know you, and I don't have a chance. You've made that clear. But I hope you end up with someone who makes you happy. Thanks. That means a lot to me. He looked out the window and onto the street below, where he could see Brock. He just got into a cab. Maybe he's going home. Okay. Thanks for everything. I've got to go. We have a concert tonight. He said goodbye and left. Hannah looked down at the scattered roses in front of her door and bent to pick them up. Brock had completely destroyed them except for one that had remained intact. She touched its soft petals and breathed in its faint scent. She was surprised to see drops of blood on the stem. She went inside her apartment and found a vase for the single rose. She then returned to the hallway and cleaned up the remaining mess. She spent the rest of the afternoon on her computer, updating her social media profile. Brock was on his way to the airport and felt a sharp pain in his finger. He was so angry, he had forgotten he pricked it earlier on the rose stem. He found some tissue in his pocket and wiped the blood off. He then called his assistant and told her to change his flight. He arrived in New York late that night. Ashley was already asleep when he got home. He quietly removed his shoes and tiptoed to her room. He gazed at her for a moment and made sure she was fast asleep. He then went to his bedroom, closed the door, and lit a cigarette. He smoked one after another before finally opening his window. He sat on the windowsill, staring into the darkness and breathing in the refreshing cold air. His mind was filled with 1,000 thoughts. He couldn't believe Hannah was seeing someone else after all they had been through. In the room next door, Ashley sat up and turned on her bedside lamp. She had been tossing and turning for hours, thinking about Latham. Austin had sent Ashley the results of his investigation via email earlier that day, but she had been too busy at work to read it until she got home. She opened the email and saw that Austin had done some serious work. There were several attachments, including one with detailed information about Mavis. She discovered that Latham's cousin was 22 years old and had just graduated from a university in London. She was the daughter of Latham's aunt, and he had hired her as an intern at his company 2 months ago. Just as I suspected, Ashley thought. She's not his girlfriend. She opened another document, which contained a detailed report of the incident that had occurred inside her apartment building. She knew Latham had been injured at the time, but had assumed someone had tried to mug him. She was shocked to discover that the person who had attacked him was an escaped convict seeking revenge for his brother's death. When she saw the picture of his brother, the drunkard from her building, everything made sense. The man had been harassing her for months, and Latham had asked for Jonathan's help to send him away. He had probably died shortly after, and his brother had assumed Latham was responsible. Ashley deduced that he had escaped from jail and had gone to her building looking for her, but had bumped into Latham instead. The two had engaged in a fight, and Latham had ended up in the hospital. The third document was a brief medical report outlining the injuries Latham had suffered, but it didn't include the diagnosis. Austin had written her saying the hospital wouldn't release any confidential patient data, but that police reports showed that Latham had been lying unconscious for several hours before the ambulance had arrived. Poor Latham, she thought, wiping tears away. If it weren't for that drunk harassing me in the first place, none of this would have happened. He was probably coming to see me when that convict attacked him in the hallway. She closed the documents, switched off her computer, and sat in her chair for a long time. Her heart ached every time she remembered him limping to his car after he had left the restaurant that day. No wonder he didn't get in touch with me after the attack. He'd even gotten his cousin to pretend they were going out, so I would forget about him. But why? Is he ashamed of his injury? Her breath caught in her throat, and she suddenly felt nauseous. She felt incredibly sorry for him and angry at the same time. She wished he would have told her about what had happened instead of trying to hide it. She took a shower and went to bed, but didn't get a wink of sleep that night. In the mountain village, the rain poured down in buckets and seemed as if it would never stop. Helga had gone to the other side of the mountain to gather herbs that morning and had told Carol and Steve she would return late in the afternoon. The two had just finished their bowl of rice and salad for lunch when it began to rain. The air was heavy, and the sky was full of dark, ominous clouds. Carol stared nervously out the window. It doesn't look like it's going to let up soon. How is Helga going to make it back in this terrible weather? Steve shrugged. She's probably used to it by now. It's just a bit of rain. She'll return eventually. Carol nodded, but kept looking out the window anxiously. There was no internet connection or electricity, so they couldn't even call for help if something happened to Helga. Steve sent Neil and Norbert to check the roof and make sure it was waterproof. They returned a half hour later, soaked to the skin. After changing into some dry clothes, they sat down at the table to play cards. Carol went to her room to take a nap in the afternoon and woke up at 5. It was still raining when she returned to the small sitting room. She heard the crack of thunder outside and jumped with fright, Huge pellets of rain smashed against the windowsill. She looked around in astonishment. "Where's Helga? Don't tell me she's still out there." Steve frowned, looking out the window. "She hasn't returned yet. Maybe she got lost, or perhaps she took advantage of the situation and ditched us." "Don't be silly. Where would she go in this weather? You three should go and look for her." "Grandma, I'm not leaving you alone here. What if something happens to you? Besides, we're not familiar with this area. I have no clue where to begin looking for her." She thought, "Okay, let's wait another hour and see if she comes back. I'm sure she's not far," Steve reassured her. "I prefer to sit tight instead of getting lost in the forest." Neil and Norbert made dinner, and they sat down to eat in silence, taking turns staring at the door. It was already 6 o'clock by the time they finished, but still, there was no sign of Helga, and Carol was very worried. "We can't wait any longer. She might be in some kind of danger. Go out and look for her. That's an order." "Steve, why don't you stay here? We'll go," Neil suggested. Steve shook his head and stood up. "No, I'm going alone. I think I know where she went. You two stay here with my grandmother." It occurred to him that the sachet she had given him had the clue of her whereabouts. He remembered looking at the embroidered pattern on it and thinking it was similar to a map. In the middle was the house surrounded by the mountains and the forest. The flower stem represents the paths along the forest and the petals of the cliffs on the mountain, he thought. "Steve, I'm worried about you going out there on your own. Why don't you let Neil and Norbert accompany you?" "No, Grandma. I refuse to leave you here by yourself. Either you let me go, or we all stay here and continue waiting." "I wonder if there are any wild animals out there," she said, wringing her hands. "What happens if you get attacked by something, or if you can't find your way back?" "Don't worry. I'll take Frida with me. It runs on batteries and can alert me in case of danger." He went to his room and returned a minute later with an iron rod. He then put on his raincoat, grabbed the rod and Frida, and walked out the door. He walked toward the forest, heading north. The path was muddy and slippery, and he soon realized his raincoat was useless in the pouring rain. His face, hair, and neck became soaked, and he could barely see a few feet in front of him in the dark. He slipped a few times and grabbed onto some branches to keep from falling, cursing Helga for convincing his grandmother to go on the trip, and blaming himself for agreeing to it. Steve had been walking for half an hour in the rain. The darkness had fallen. As he turned his flashlight on, he thought of something and asked Frida to play some music for him. Frida hadn't originally been waterproof, but after the explosion in Mexico, Nancy had modified the robot again. Not only was it covered in metal, but it was also waterproof and resistant to high temperatures. Music soon accompanied the sound of rain, and he asked for it to be played purely for Helga to hear, assuming, of course, that she was nearby. The flashlight only allowed for limited vision. He wasn't walking fast, but he almost slipped a few times. His shoes had long been stained by the mud, and the lower half of his pants were also covered. They felt heavy and stuck to his calves. Steve had always been a germaphobe, and he hated feeling dirty. His brows were knitted tightly together in a frown, and he made the decision that he would take his grandmother back to New York as soon as he could. He didn't want to stay after the current situation was resolved. The half hour turned into an hour. Steve had gotten into a smooth rhythm, using his flashlight to illuminate his surroundings. But he still couldn't see much, and had a sudden realization that he was lost. He knew that the cliff drawn on the map was in the northernmost direction from the house. He had a compass, which confirmed that he was heading north, and hadn't deviated from that direction. It was already 7 or 8 in the evening. He knew that in the city, it was a busy time, and many office workers would only be just returning home after a day's work. But in the mountain forest, everything was quiet apart from the constant sound of the rain. Steve wasn't afraid of much, but he was a little worried that something really had happened to Helga. As soon as that concern popped up in his mind, he mentally slapped it back. He told himself that she had brought whatever had happened on herself, and that he didn't need to take any responsibility at all. But he still walked for another hour. He estimated that it would take him 3 hours to reach the cliff on a sunny day if the map was correct. He was aware that his pace was much slower because of the rain and darkness, and figured that if he kept going at his current pace, it would take him 3 times as long to get there. The road grew more rugged, and the terrain began to rise, so he had faith that he was going in the right direction. After walking for 3 hours, he stopped to rest for the first time. He wanted to clean up the mud on his body, but he quickly realized that it was a pointless mission and gave up. He was extremely irritated by that. He also knew that sometimes taking a break could dent a person's determination to push on, so when the thought of retreating arose, he moved resolutely forward. He had gone out to look for Helga, and he would search until the end. If he didn't find her, he planned to go back to his grandmother at the house at dawn and return to New York. He didn't want Helga to have access to her any longer. Although he was thinking of leaving, Steve didn't slow down, even when the road became harder to navigate. His watch was waterproof, and he checked the time when he neared the cliff. It was almost 1 o'clock in the morning. Steve asked Frida to turn the music up to the max, but then he changed his mind. "Forget it. Just keep calling her name." "What name?" Frida asked. "Are you with that woman?" "Congratulations! I'll drink to that." Steve was exhausted, and he couldn't contain his anger at that response. He shouted the answer into the night sky. "Helga!" Frida immediately shouted the same and didn't stop. It didn't know what tired was, and it couldn't get a hoarse throat. It was like having the name played on repeat, and it reverberated off the other side of the cliff. When Steve heard the cacophony of sound, his temples started throbbing, and he decided that he never wanted to hear the name again after that night. The cliff stretched about 300 yards, and Steve used his flashlight to do a sweep from one end to the other. The rain continued to batter him and made it hard to see. He wiped his face with frustration with the other hand. He could feel his hope waning because the mountain was so big. He had hoped that Frida's music would alert Helga to their presence, but he realized that the rain would have stopped the sound from traveling far. He was also aware that they may have already been past her and not known. After a while, Frida suddenly stopped calling, and Steve wasn't prepared for the dearth of sound. The robot's voice filled the void again. "I activated my infrared scan, and there is a heat signature approximately 10 yards away at 4 o'clock. I suspect it to be human." There was a pause while it scanned again. "The second scan has shown that the object is not dangerous. It can be approached." Steve immediately headed in that direction. As he got closer, he didn't need the scan to tell him that the person on the ground was Helga. She was still wearing the green linen pants that she liked, although they were covered with mud. Her long hair was matted and stuck to her pale face. She looked peaceful. Steve was shocked and quickly bent over and checked her pulse. It seemed to be normal, but he directed Frida to Helga's side and asked the robot to check her heart rate. "Heart rate is 62 and normal." Steve let out a sigh of relief. He hesitated for a moment before he picked Helga up. She didn't seem aware of anything, and the frequency of her breathing didn't change. He visually swept the area and saw Helga's backpack and its contents scattered on the ground. He was going to leave it, but he had only taken a couple of steps in the other direction before he changed his mind and scooped it up as well. He felt disgusted by the mud on Helga's body as he held her. He frowned as he asked Frida if the pathway they had taken was still in its databank. The mechanical voice was calm as Frida replied in the affirmative, but Steve could hear the pride in it. "Do you record the surroundings?" he asked. "Is there any place where we can avoid the rain?" Frida quickly scanned the images that had been retained. "There is a cave that could provide shelter a couple miles away." "All right, lead the way." 2 miles or so on flat ground was nothing, but the road they were on was mountainous, and with another person in his arms, Steve didn't get very far before he started to struggle. Helga wasn't showing any signs of waking up, but he knew that he couldn't leave her on the road. He waited until he found a big tree and leaned her against it. He then turned around and squatted down so that he could carry her on his back. He had never carried a person that way before, and although it still wasn't easy, it saved him a lot of effort and didn't block his line of sight. Steve kept going until he reached the entrance of the cave. His legs felt heavy, but he held on long enough for Frida to scan the cave to ensure that it was safe inside. Only then did he carry Helga in. Fortunately, the cave sloped upward, so any rain that got in would drain away. It was dry inside. He placed Helga and her backpack on the dry ground and went back into the rain because he couldn't bear the mud any longer. He was covered in it and figured that the rain would wash away the worst of it. Once he felt some semblance of clean, he returned to the cave. Helga still hadn't woken up, and he ran the flashlight over her. Her face was muddy, as was her hair, and he was slightly horrified at how dirty she was everywhere. He liked to be clean, and he liked others to be too, when in close proximity. He looked at her again and came to a decision. The worst of the mud was on her hair and face. The rain had washed some of it away while she had been on his back. He took her back out into the rain for a makeshift bath as well. Steve maneuvered her around so that she was on his lap and her back was on his chest. He decided that as he supported her with one hand and washed away the mud with the other. He started with her hair, but when he got to her face, he realized how smooth and delicate her skin was and felt a little uncomfortable about touching her without her knowledge. His desire for cleanliness trumped that slight awkwardness, so he continued until she was washed to his satisfaction. He then took her back to the cave, and tiredness overtook him. Although he was used to exercise, he had been on the move for a long time. There was nothing in the cave. Everything outside was wet, and he couldn't find anything at all dry to keep them warm or start a fire. He leaned against the wall of the cave and closed his eyes. His rest didn't last long, though, because he suddenly realized he hadn't checked to see if Helga was hurt. He didn't have much experience taking care of people, and he gave her a very cursory once-over. He confirmed that there were no injuries to her legs or arms, and drew the line at looking at other body parts more closely. He placed his hand on her forehead and confirmed that she didn't have a fever. But that only made him more curious about why she was unconscious. He was definitely a little worried, so he asked Frida to scan her vitals. If her body temperature and heart rate show any abnormalities, inform me immediately. Frida was happy to help. All right, your wish is my command. Steve rolled his eyes because he felt that the robot's response lacked respect. He leaned against the wall of the cave to rest. He didn't remember closing his eyes or sitting down to sleep. He thought he heard Helga at one stage, but neither her voice nor movement really registered in his sleepy haze. He was vaguely aware of a weight on his shoulder and someone leaning against him. And he wanted to open his eyes, but he was just too tired. When he did wake up, it was because of a sharp pain in his ankle. He opened his eyes just in time to see a thin snake with red stripes on its head. He noticed its forked tongue, and its fangs were stained with blood. Almost immediately, the pain in his ankle turned to numbness, and he felt as though he were in a trance. At the same time, the force on his shoulder suddenly lessened, and Helga spoke. It's a snake. The weird numb feeling was already spreading from his ankle and up his leg. He was shocked and distracted from his original question about why Helga was resting on his shoulder. Poisonous? He asked stiffly. Although Helga had also just woken up, she reacted quickly and applied pressure above the wound. Don't move, and try to breathe slowly and calmly to slow the spread. If you allow the fear to take over, your blood will pump the poison around too quickly. She then took off her shirt. Steve saw parts of her body that he wouldn't have otherwise seen. But given this situation, he had no thoughts of seduction. He felt that death was slowly approaching, and he forced himself to stay calm and focus on survival. He sat frozen like a statue. The snake that had bitten him had already disappeared, but all Steve could think of was that he wanted to kill it for putting him in that predicament. Beside him, Helga was quickly and skillfully rolling up her shirt. Despite his best intentions, he couldn't help but notice the exquisite curves of her body, and couldn't believe that he had thought her flat-chested. He worked hard to make sure there was no change in his expression to indicate his thoughts. This might hurt a little, she said. Bear with it. She tied her shirt around his leg above the snakebite and tightened it as much as she could to further slow the flow of blood through the limb. The spread of the numbness seemed to slow a little. I'll go out to find medicine. Don't move. Steve grunted in reply. He was generally a cooperative patient because he valued his life, and he refocused his energies on slowing his metabolism. Helga was a big believer in there being an herb for every ailment, so she went on a hunt for something useful. Helga returned and tightened the makeshift pressure bandage around Steve's leg. She massaged the leg with a downward motion, and blood started to seep out of the bite marks. I'm trying to draw out the poison. These herbs should help. She crushed up some of the plants in her hand and pressed the concoction onto his ankle. She then found another piece of cloth to hold them in place. She gave him the rest of the plants she had gathered to eat. I can't make tea with it, so you have to chew it and swallow the juices. He looked at what appeared to be grass in her hand and frowned. He had gotten over his initial shock from the bite and was on full alert. Has it been washed? Helga shook her head. We don't have any time to play around. Steve's frown deepened. Surely you can wash it in the rain. He felt that it wasn't too much to ask because, in his mind, he was only suffering because he had gone out to find and save her. She shook her head again. The rain stopped. The nearest stream is a little far. He took the herbs from her and looked speechlessly at them. No matter how he looked at them, they never became more appetizing. Helga didn't have much patience for non-cooperative patients. She knew that if she hadn't intervened, he wouldn't have survived for as long as he had, because the snake had been highly venomous. But even though she had helped him expel the poison, she knew that some remained, and that the herbs would help drain it away. She stood in front of Steve, looking at the medicinal herbs in his hands. He was also looking at the herbs, but his face was full of disdain. Helga knew they didn't have long, so she quickly leaned over and grabbed his hand with one of hers. She pried his mouth open with the other. She had taken him by complete surprise, and when he opened his mouth wider to object, she took the opportunity to stuff the herbs into it. Steve was speechless, and not just because his mouth was stuffed full of plants. He locked his eyes on Helga angrily and tried to communicate with the fire in his eyes. She was afraid that he wouldn't chew, so she placed her hand on his chin and held his mouth closed. He reached out instinctively to push her away, but as he pressed his hand to her body, he realized that something wasn't right. His hand had landed on something soft. It had landed on something that shouldn't be pushed. Both of them looked down at the spot where his hand lay. He reacted as quickly as if he had received an electric shock and retracted his hand. The atmosphere suddenly became awkward, and the air in the small cave felt like it had no oxygen left. Steve couldn't look at Helga and turned his gaze away. He suddenly realized that his heart was beating a little fast, and he could feel the blood beginning to surge through his body. He knew that he was in the wrong, and he knew that he needed to slow his heart rate. So although the stuff in his mouth was disgusting, he started to chew. A bitter taste filled his mouth, and he felt that he would never be able to describe how horrible it was in words. He felt a surge of anger as he continued to chew, but he refused to give in and spit it out. Beside him, Helga had recovered quickly. She didn't show any sign of embarrassment and managed to speak naturally. I'll go and get something for you to spit it in, since you'll probably think it's gross to have it on the floor of the cave. She then ventured out and found a large leaf. Steve had endured the foul mixture as long as he could and spat the herbs out onto it as instructed. He watched her as she moved away. Because she hadn't slapped him when he had touched her and was continuing to be attentive, he decided that she must have a crush on him. He gave a barely noticeable smirk and thought that she was going to great effort to cover it up. Having put the idea out there before, he decided against exposing her again. She was back in front of him before too long. The rain stopped, but there's a lot of mud on the ground. It'll be hard going, and I think it'll be an hour or two before it's suitable to walk. You can use the time to rest, and I'll pick some fruit I found to stave off hunger." Steve gave Helga an assessing look. "You won't faint again, will you?" She shook her head. "Yesterday was a special situation." Steve's first thought when he heard that was that the problem was specific to women. His second thought, if he was right, was that she hadn't had a change of pants and had been soaked, and that there would be bacteria everywhere. He tried to stop the direction of his thoughts and resumed his position against the wall of the cave. Helga didn't think much about it at all and went out to pick the wild fruits she had seen. A few of the fruit trees were growing near the cliff. They may have been wild, but the fruit was delicious. She was a skilled tree climber, so she scaled one quickly and filled her backpack. She then harvested the herbs that she hadn't managed to pick the day before. The Jung family recipe for infertility required several important plants, and she had found some ready for harvest. She carefully picked them up and placed them in her backpack. Helga thought about who would be eating the fruit and chose not to go directly back to the cave. Instead, she went to a nearby stream and washed the fruits before returning. The whole excursion took her almost an hour. Steve had taken the advice to rest and relax during that time. Frida was doing its job and quietly guarding the entrance of the cave. The robot used infrared scans to determine any danger, but with the snake being cold-blooded and small, it hadn't registered, and Frida was now being extra vigilant. Helga almost accidentally kicked Frida when she entered the cave. She quickly backpedaled and put down her backpack before she bent over and picked the robot up. She had never seen anything like it. It was small and toy-like, but she remembered that it had spoken to her when she had woken up. While Helga was studying Frida, Steve opened his eyes. Helga noticed and put the robot down so that she could retrieve her backpack. She handed the fruit inside to Steve. Steve looked at the fruit suspiciously, and Helga understood his hesitation. "I washed them in the stream." "There's no mudslide in the stream from the mountain?" he asked. She shook her head. "No." He reluctantly took some, but his eyes remained on Helga. He felt that he was receiving extra special care from the doctor. His eyes narrowed. "Did you sleep well last night?" Helga clearly didn't understand Steve's meaning and nodded her head. "It was cold, but I warmed up at some point." The truth was that she had warmed up after she had cuddled into him. Steve ate the food on offer and almost instantly felt that his physical strength had recovered, so he attempted to move. He stood up too quickly, however, and in his weakened state, he almost blacked out. He fell toward Helga, and they caught each other. He instinctively tightened his grip as he stabilized himself. His position became obvious once his vision cleared, but his sense of touch could have told him the same information. He was pressed into a woman's soft body. His arms had tightened around her automatically, so she was completely in his embrace. She smelled of herbs, and the scent drilled right into his brain. It wasn't bitter as they had tasted, but had a slight sweetness. He gradually recovered his center of gravity, and the awkwardness of his position became even more apparent. He wanted to let go of Helga, but she didn't seem to have any intention of breaking free. She just looked at him. "I fainted yesterday because of a physical condition. It's something I've had since I was young, and it flares up every once in a while. It's not contagious. When my mentor took my case, I was close to death. It was a miracle that he was able to save me, but the problem has never fully resolved." She paused and cleared her throat. "Can you stand on your own?" Steve snapped back to reality and quickly let go of her, but his mind was recalling what she had just said. The information that he finally focused on was the part about it not being contagious. "So I guess you're not a perfect doctor with the answer to everything," he said. "I'm just a lifelong learner. Even my mentor had a disease that he was unable to treat." Helga thought sadly of her deceased teacher. Steve raised his eyebrows slightly, but he didn't say anything. He moved more slowly and found that he had recovered a large degree of mobility. There was only a slight pain in his ankle, and it didn't affect his walking at all. For the first time, he expressed his gratitude to Helga. "Thank you for helping me today." Helga shrugged it off. I should thank you for saving me yesterday." Instead of replying, he walked to the entrance of the cave and looked outside. The weather was clear, and he was worried about Carol. "Let's head back." Helga nodded and went to get her things. But Steve stretched out his hand to stop her. "Let me do it." He thought it was the least he could do, and she didn't argue. She waited for him to grab the backpack and only spoke again once his back was turned. "I want to tell you something." Steve stood still and waited for her to confess her love to him. He turned around slowly to give himself time to think of a reason to knock her back. "What happened yesterday was an accident," she said. "Please don't take Carol away yet. Let her stay in the mountains with me for a little longer." He felt blindsided and didn't know how to respond. "Huh?" "I know you've always been opposed to me going to care for your family, and I know you didn't want me bringing Carol on this trip. But if you persist for a month longer, your grandmother's health will improve even more, and I may be able to prolong her life. Last night, I made the decision to return to New York as soon as possible. I hope you'll give me another chance." She raised her head and looked him straight in the eye. There was a rare emotion in her eyes. They gazed at each other for a few seconds before he spoke. "Give me another reason to agree." Helga didn't blink. "There's a specific plant here that I need for medicine, but I have to wait for it to flower before I can harvest it." "Do you know how I found this place and didn't get lost?" he asked, seemingly out of nowhere. "No." "Because of your sachet." As he spoke, he watched her face closely. "Because of the map embroidered on it?" Her eyes lit up because she would never have expected him to figure that out. "It represents the place where we are. The surrounding engravings are all maps. All of my sachets are embroidered like that." Steve almost smiled at that, but he didn't want her to see. He started to walk out of the cave. "You can keep her here for a few more days. If it's not looking good after that, I'll take her away." Helga felt relieved. She sincerely hoped that Carol would get better. Of course, she also hoped that after Carol's health improved, Jonathan could give her access to more Jung family recipes. Without her mentor, her pathway to learning has been severely diminished. If she wanted to further her learning, she could only place her hopes in knowledge gained from the Jung family. She had been obsessed with honoring her medical skills for so many years and didn't know how else to do it. They were both lost in their own thoughts until Frida interrupted. "Do you want some romantic music to boost the atmosphere?" As Steve shouted, "Shut up!" Helga asked, "Can you?" Steve glanced at Helga, and for some unknown reason, he said the name of a popular song which Frida obligingly played. At the same time, thousands of miles away, Nancy received a call from Harold. He told her that things would be settled in a week and that he would see her in New York afterward. Nancy hurriedly passed on the news to Jonathan. "Just in time," he said. "I'm going to Houston this week, but I should be back to welcome him with you." "Why don't we go to Houston together? There's a Bright Star event happening there, and it would be good for me to show my face." Nancy had settled into her pregnancy at that stage, and things were stable, so Jonathan agreed. "Okay, but please try not to overwork yourself and get too tired. I'll wait for you at the hotel afterward." Nancy nodded, smiled, and rubbed her protruding belly. "I also want to go see someone." Jonathan immediately guessed who it was when he saw the look in her eyes. "Stark?" Nancy nodded again. "I didn't plan to go, but when I think about how I'll have to stay in a hotel in Houston, it makes me unhappy. So I want to see him and tell him that I'm pregnant. It's good news." The Johnson family home in Houston was currently sealed up. She had to wait for Jacob to officially return before she could truly inherit it. Nancy was unhappy that she couldn't stay in her own house in Houston, and she wanted to make Stark suffer for it. The last time she had seen him in prison, he had seemed completely drained of his spirit. She was curious to know what had become of him another few months down the track. She hadn't tried to glean any information about him from anyone, but she had decided it was time for her to do so as they were leaving the next day. When they arrived, Jonathan went directly to the company's Houston branch. Nancy, on the other hand, had a restful morning and didn't go anywhere until the afternoon. Because she was pregnant, Jonathan had arranged several bodyguards for her. They were all ready to protect her. The weather had grown colder, and there were outdoor heaters at the event, but everyone had piled on the layers. Nancy was wearing an oversized white sweater, which included a circle of white fur around her neck. On her lower half, she was wearing slim-fitting maternity pants. The large sweater completely covered her stomach, and the pants showed off her toned legs, so it was impossible to tell that she was pregnant. She was also young, and looked even younger out of her professional attire. There were many comments about her appearance. She looks stunning. I would never have expected someone so powerful and wealthy to look like a teenage girl. I'm so envious of Jonathan. Me too. It's burning me up inside. There was a lot of enthusiasm in the community for the Bright Star event. It also happened to coincide with an event that had been organized at the Houston prison. The more hardened criminals were being allowed television privileges, while the lesser offenders were participating in indoor sporting events. Those indoors were hustled into the main hall as the Houston News Channel was being broadcast. Stark's physical condition had deteriorated over the past few months. Any desire to live had disappeared, and he was like a walking corpse. He was cuffed and wheelchair-bound, and he asked for a corner spot where he could feel safer. The felons were all interested in the local channel, as they felt it was more entertaining than the newspapers they were normally given to read. Most of them looked at the screen in great anticipation. Stark, on the other hand, looked vague and uninterested. He was looking in the direction of the television, but he seemed to be taking in nothing. That was until a female voice captured his attention. Next, we invite the president and CEO of Bright Star, Maria Miller, to present the awards. When Stark heard Maria's name, he startled slightly, but his gaze remained unfocused. The other criminals piqued his interest with their comments. The CEO is so young. She looks about 18. She's beautiful. I've been locked up for 10 years. Is everyone in the outside world like that now? I'm guessing she's a daughter who inherits. She's so beautiful that I feel like crying when I look at her. People from the crowd at the event where Nancy was were saying very similar things, but the announcer silenced them so that Maria could speak. In the ensuing silence, Stark heard a familiar voice coming from the TV. He used his good eye to take a better look. The woman on the screen was the same one that he had seen before. She had a smile on her face and an engaging way of speaking that could hold an audience captive. Her voice was soft and firm, and he suddenly thought of Nancy. It wasn't her voice, and it wasn't her face, but he felt that the woman on stage and Nancy were shockingly similar. Scenes from the past kept invading his mind. Stark covered his head in pain, but he could still hear Nancy's voice. In his head, he heard her say that the person who had killed his father wasn't Edward, but the person who had been pretending to help him all along. She said that the person had only used him as a tool to get rid of their own enemies. In his head, she said that he had repaid kindness with ingratitude, and that he didn't care about the love that the Johnsons had given him, and instead had caused the family's death and destruction. She then started talking about rebirth and retribution. Because Stark was sitting in the corner, the people in front of him were all glued to the TV. No one took much notice of him. On the television, Nancy had finished her speech and was giving out awards to the winners. Stark looked at her and vaguely recalled the time many years before when she had won the first prize in the university robot design competition. He had gone to the awards ceremony as well, and although he had been far from home, there were people who had recognized him. He had been asked many times if he was Nancy's older brother. He remembered clearly how he had felt at that time. He had smiled and nodded and felt particularly proud and happy. He had been pleased to claim her as his sister. But all that had changed, and he had become blinded by hatred. He had forgotten all about those feelings. The pain in his brain intensified. It started as a headache, but eventually the pain spread all over his body. It then went numb, his vision went black, and he lost consciousness. Nancy received a call from the prison not long after she had handed out the awards. Stark had left only her contact details, so she was the one informed about his health. She heard from the prison that Stark had a brain tumor and that he was already nearing the end of his life. The prison hospital estimated that he didn't have long and suggested he may only live for a few more days. She was shocked by the prognosis. "May I ask where he is now?" "He's in the hospital inpatient department. How soon can you be there?" Nancy did some calculations. "An hour and a half." After hanging up the phone, she found herself unable to calm down. Stark had killed her parents. He had even killed her in her previous life. Some things were engraved on her soul, along with a hatred that couldn't be dispersed with time. But she still wasn't sure what to think about him dying. After ending the call with the prison hospital, Nancy called Jonathan and told him what had happened. His meetings had just ended. "I'll come and pick you up right away. We'll go to the hospital together." By the time Jonathan and Nancy arrived at the hospital, it was already evening. The setting sun sprinkled a faint layer of warm light along the corridor, lighting their way. Jonathan held Nancy's hand, and a nurse led them to Stark's ward. "Mr. Green has just woken up," she told them. "But he may not be lucid. He hasn't eaten anything yet, and he keeps calling for someone called Nancy. Do you have any idea who that might be?" Jonathan and Nancy glanced at each other as they followed the nurse to Stark's bed, but neither of them said anything. Jonathan took a deep breath as he saw Stark. Knowing what the man had done, his immediate instinct was to protect Nancy. He tightened his grip on her hand. Nancy told him that Stark had aged 10 years in the time he had been in prison, but Jonathan wasn't prepared for the sight of the man lying in the bed before him. His hair had turned completely white, and his face was full of wrinkles. His skin was sallow and saggy, and his eyes drooped and gazed into the distance. Jonathan had never imagined that Stark, who had once been famous in the business world, would end up like that. "He's aged more than 10 years, he thought, trying to hide his shock at his former rival's appearance. He sat down in a chair beside the bed and looked closely at Stark. "Do you know who I am?" Stark's eyes slowly focused on Jonathan's face, and after a few moments, he laughed hoarsely. "You." It seemed like he was still conscious, and Jonathan nodded. "Do you know why I'm here?" Stark squeezed at a smile, which looked more like a grimace. "So that you can see me make a fool of myself." His life may have been coming to an end, but at that moment, he felt perfectly clear-headed. He recalled the time when he and Jonathan had been competing against each other, and he had fallen into Jonathan's trap. He realized that his former opponent was still as dazzling as ever and hadn't aged a day, while he had become a shadow of his old self. He smiled sardonically. "I'm not here for you," Jonathan said. "I'm here for Maria's sake. I didn't want her to have to face you alone." What he meant was that it wasn't worth it for him to take time out of his busy schedule to visit Stark. Jonathan was there purely for his wife's benefit. Stark's gaze swept past Jonathan and fell on Nancy. He had heard that the two of them had gotten married, and his eyes took in the large diamond ring on her finger. Once, he had believed that she had been lying to him about her marriage in order to make him angry. But that emotion had long gone, and he felt a sinking feeling deep inside. Looking at them standing side by side, his eyes stung with the threat of tears. He had been reduced to nothing, while Jonathan had obtained the whole world. He couldn't describe the sensation in his heart, and when he looked at Nancy and Maria's body, he saw another familiar face. His sister's, the former Nancy's. He suddenly became animated. "Hey, Nancy, I have something to say to you." He grabbed the edge of the bed and tried to pull himself up, but he didn't have the strength, and he slumped back onto the pillows. At first, Nancy and Jonathan were concerned that he would inadvertently reveal her true identity if he kept using her name. But then they realized that the nurses and others around probably thought he was delirious, so they relaxed about it. "What do you want to say to her?" Jonathan asked. Stark addressed the nurse and a prison officer who had been placed in his room to guard him. "Can I speak to her alone?" "Sorry, I can't allow that," the prison guard replied. Stark then addressed the nurse. "What about you? Can you leave?" She nodded and left the room. Then, Stark looked at Jonathan. "And you?" Jonathan gave Nancy a brief hug and walked out of the room. Knowing there was an armed guard there, he didn't feel so bad about leaving his wife in the room with her murderer. "So what is it?" Nancy asked. Stark had planned to say a lot, but when it came down to it, he found he couldn't get the words out. The room fell silent. The only sound that could be heard was the beeping of his heart monitor. Nancy waited for him to speak, but as the silence dragged on, her patience began to wane. "I'm not here for the fun of it, you know." She placed her hand on her abdomen, and her mouth formed a faint smile. "I'm having a baby." She enjoyed the look of anguish that formed on his face. "In fact, I'm having 3 babies." The color drained from Stark's face, and Nancy smirked with satisfaction. "Congratulations," he whispered through dry lips. She smiled. "Thank you. I hope you're not envious. After all, you are the last of the Green family." With that, she turned to leave. He wasn't ready for her to go just yet. With clenched fists, he called out to her. "I saw you on TV today." Nancy stopped in her tracks, and then she realized that he must be talking about her appearance at the event earlier in the day. Nevertheless, she was surprised that he had bothered to watch. "It made me think of the time you received that award in the robot building competition," he continued. "When we were both at Houston University, I saw you on the stage then." The words caught in his throat, and he choked back sobs. "I felt quite proud at the time." Nancy was astonished. She hadn't expected him to bring that up. His lips began to quiver, and she was afraid he was about to start crying. "I was really happy for you," he went on. "If only I'd stopped. Nancy, I'm sorry. I destroyed everything." He clutched the edge of the bed tightly and repeated the words. "I'm sorry, Nancy. I'm so sorry." Nancy stood rooted to the spot, her emotions swirling around in her head. So many memories, some from her previous life, appeared in her mind, and she felt confused. She stared at Stark, and for a moment, it was as if she had never met him before. She sighed deeply. "I will never forgive you, Stark, and when you're dead, I will forget you ever existed." As the last words left her mouth, his heart monitor began beeping frantically, and an alarm sounded. The nurse came running into the room, followed closely by Jonathan, who rushed to Nancy's side and put his arm around her. Stark tried desperately to say one more thing, but his words were barely audible. "If I had to do it again, I would." Then, a long beep sounded from the heart monitor, and a flat line appeared on its screen. Nancy watched in shock as Stark's arm dropped and hung loosely from his shoulder, and his eyes stared blindly at the ceiling. As for what he had been about to say, she would never know. While they waited for a doctor to arrive, but in the end, they reached the conclusion that there was no use, and Stark was declared dead. He had no family, so the funeral arrangements were handed over to the prison authorities. Nancy felt a little numb as she and Jonathan walked out of the prison hospital. It had gotten dark outside, and the air was still. She inhaled deeply and let out a long sigh. Stark had died. All the hatred that he instilled in her over the years had turned to dust. Nancy got into the back of the car beside Jonathan and threw her arms around his neck. He patted her back gently and soothed her. "It's all over now. It's time to move on." She nodded and kissed him on the lips. Yes. She leaned on his shoulder, and the driver started the car's engine. Her fingers were tightly clenched into fists. They were almost at the hotel when Nancy thought of something. She picked up her phone and sent a message to Jacob, telling him that Stark was dead. She knew it was later at night in New York, and she didn't expect her brother to see her message until the morning, so she put her phone back in her purse. But Jacob had been to an event that day and had gotten home late. He had just gone to bed when Nancy's message arrived. He read it and stared at the words for several long moments as their meaning sank in. We can finally put the past behind us, he thought with some relief. Whether it was regret or pain that he felt, everything disappeared with the news of Stark's death. He gazed out the window into the void beyond. Mom, Dad, that evil man is dead at last. At the same time, Nancy turned to Jonathan. It's a long time since I was last in Houston. It's going to be hard for me to come back when my bump gets big, so I'd like to pay my respects to my parents tomorrow while we're still here. Great idea, Jonathan agreed. We'll go together. The car pulled up outside the hotel, and they both got out. A large LED screen in the floor-to-ceiling windows of the shopping mall across the street caught Nancy's attention. It seemed to be broadcasting an awards ceremony. She stopped to watch it for a moment, and she was surprised to see a familiar face appear on the screen. She let out a gasp and turned to look at Jonathan, her eyes as wide as saucers. He was bemused by her expression. What is it? She pointed to the screen excitedly. It's Dan Williams. They just showed a clip of his last movie. Jonathan had known Dan, but he hadn't been that familiar with him or any of his movies. He looked up at the screen and recognized the face beaming down from it. He chuckled with surprise. They watched together, and although there was no sound coming from the screen, they deduced from the subtitles that Dan was one of the 4 nominees for the Best Male Actor in a Supporting Role award. Nancy found that she actually felt a little nervous as they waited for the winner to be announced and the subtitles to appear on the screen. And then the words appeared. And the winner is Dan Williams for his role in The Secret Under the Ice Mountain. Nancy squealed and jumped up and down with delight. She took her phone out of her purse and took a picture of the screen. Then, she and Jonathan read the next set of subtitles. As you all know, Dan's sadly no longer with us, so this award is presented to him posthumously. Here to receive it on his behalf is Dan's brother. Please welcome Mr. Oliver Williams. The camera panned to Oliver. He was dressed in a tuxedo, and he got up from a seat and climbed the few steps to the stage. Nancy and Jonathan read his speech on the screen. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. I'm here tonight on behalf of my brother to receive this award. He once told me that he loved his job more than anything, and I know he loved using his talent to portray all his characters. He would be delighted to receive this, and I'm very proud and honored to be able to stand here in his place. Thank you all for supporting him, and thank you to all the fans who are with him until the end. Thank you. He took the trophy from the famous producer who had presented the award and held it above his head. Then, he kissed it, bowed, and returned to his seat. Having seen enough, Nancy and Jonathan entered the hotel and went to their room. Nancy sent the photo of Dan on the big screen to Esther, who called instantly. The two of them chatted about Dan in the past, and the nostalgia made them feel a little sad. Dan had finally gotten the award that represented the culmination of all his hard work, but he would never know that he had won it. Nancy told Esther about Stark, and even though the man had been evil, they both sighed sadly. They chatted for a little longer, and then Esther suddenly cried out. Oh, I've just remembered something. There's something else I have to tell you. Nancy wondered what it could be, and then it occurred to her. Oh my gosh, Esther, you're not pregnant, are you? Esther squealed. I swear we're twins. You always read me so well. We must be telepathic. She laughed. Yes, I am pregnant. I think it was that night after you told me about Norman and Sydney getting their marriage license. Yeah, Nancy chuckled. I could tell you and Xavier were pretty eager to get back to what you were doing. Esther laughed again. That was a great night, if you know what I mean. Have you had a checkup yet? Yes, I went to the hospital for a blood test yesterday. Esther did a quick calculation. Our babies will be 3 months apart, but they'll still be in the same school year. I can picture it now. 4 little kids all toddling off to school together. Nancy chuckled again. Hey, you have twin genes. You might be having 2 babies without even having to cheat like I did. Imagine that. You with twins, and me with triplets. I'd love to have twins, Esther said dreamily. And I don't care if they're boys or girls. Anyway, if your cousin hadn't been so impatient, I probably would have gone to see Helga too. Oh, you wouldn't have wanted to do that. You might have ended up with 4 babies. The 2 women laughed heartedly at the idea of that. Imagine it. With your 3 and my 4, we could almost make a football team, Esther said through squeals of laughter. But seriously though, we should get the nurseries ready together. Yeah, that's a great idea. We can go shopping for toys and clothes and get everything ready before they arrive. And we'll buy girls' and boys' clothes just to cover both possibilities. Sure. I'll be back in New York in 2 days' time. Then we can go shopping together. Absolutely. And we can get some baby carriers while we're at it. We're going to be a family of 5, so you should buy one for your husband too. I'd love to see him carrying a baby. Nancy smiled at the image of Jonathan with a tiny baby strapped to his chest. The picture I have in my mind right now is almost too beautiful to bear. I don't want it to ever go away. I know. Just thinking about it makes me feel all weak in the knees. And it's really not that far away for you. I can't wait to give each of your 3 babies a hug. Me too. But we haven't even decided on any names yet. There's plenty of time for that. You still got a few months to go. No need to rush it. Esther paused momentarily. I have no idea of any names yet either. That's something else we could do next week. We can pick out some names. Nancy continued to chat happily with Esther for a while longer before ending the call just as Jonathan entered the room. Hey, I heard you say something about cheating with Helga, he said. What was that all about? Nancy stared at him, dumbstruck. She rapidly weighed up the pros and cons of telling him about her sessions with Helga. She decided it was probably best to come clean. She took a deep breath. I really wanted twins, so I asked Helga for some help to make it happen, and she helped me. She didn't have to explain specifically what she meant, but Jonathan understood, and his face darkened. Babe, are you telling me that you deliberately ensured you would have multiple babies? He kept his voice as calm as he could. Don't you know how risky that is? How could you be so reckless? Nancy bit her lower lip. She knew that what she had done was wrong, and she felt guilty for both having done it in the first place and keeping it from Jonathan. She looked away, feeling embarrassed. Why didn't you talk to me first? He went on. And if you want more than one baby, you don't have to have them all at once. We're both young. We have plenty of time to add to our family. Nancy shot him an awkward glance. I heard that Helga was really good at this sort of thing, and I've always loved the idea of twins. She said she had a special way to help stimulate the ovaries. It was nothing, really. Is that what you truly think? Jonathan's voice was beginning to rise in pitch and volume. How confident of success do you think she was? Even if it was 99%, there's still a 1% risk. And what if you were to be that 1%? It might as well have been 100% risk. Did you even consider that? Nancy heard the anger in his voice as he tried to put his point across with made-up numbers, and her guilty conscience turned to grievance. She rubbed her nose, and her eyes became blurry, and then she lost all control of her emotions, and tears began to flow down her cheeks and drip onto the carpet. Jonathan gasped in surprise, and his anger instantly evaporated. He pulled a handful of tissues from the tissue box and handed them to her. Hey, babe, why are you crying? I'm just worried about you," and ignored him. He hugged her from behind and tried to wipe away her tears. "I'm not angry anymore. It's my fault. My attitude was all wrong. I'm sorry." Nancy felt wronged, but she also felt a little annoyed with herself for feeling so emotional. Before the pregnancy, she would never have reacted with such a display, but for the past few months, her emotions had been sky high. "You're right," she said sulkily. "Your attitude sucks." Jonathan wanted to refute. He hadn't changed his mind about the way he felt about what she had done, but seeing her like that had made it clear to him that as long as he defended his point of view, she would continue to cry. So he gave in to his better judgment and apologized again. "I'm sorry. It's all my fault. I shouldn't have reacted the way I did." Nancy was reluctant to move on without more of a fight, and she continued to give him the cold shoulder. Jonathan could see that he had a lot more work to do to get her back on side. He sighed. "You're such a strong woman. You'll have no trouble giving birth to 3 babies. Even if you had to cheat to make it happen, I'm sure it won't be a problem for you." That was what she had been waiting to hear, and her grievance melted away. For the first time since the fight began, she looked him in the eye. Her eyelashes glistened with teardrops. "Helga only gave me some homeopathic medicines and treatments. There's nothing wrong with that, right?" Jonathan was no longer in the mood to argue with her, and he continued to compromise. "There's absolutely nothing wrong with it." Nancy began to feel much happier. Her pregnant woman's mood disappeared just as quickly as it had arrived, and she smiled at her husband. But he gave her a look that she couldn't decipher, and she frowned. "You said that you trust Helga's medical skills, right?" he asked tentatively. "And remember when she told you that the babies are doing well?" Nancy looked at him suspiciously as she waited for what he was about to say. "Well, surely we can carry on as normal, if you get my drift." Nancy rolled her eyes, but before she knew it, he had lifted her up off her feet and was carrying her into the bedroom. She pulled her shirt down over her belly. "What are you doing? The babies won't like it." "The doctors told us they won't start moving until around 4 months, so they won't even know." He leaned over and kissed her belly. "You'll scare them." "It'll be fine. I'll just go in and say hi." His eyes were like whirlpools hypnotizing her. She laughed incredulously at his audacious comment. She smacked him half-heartedly on the chest. "You're an immoral man." He grinned, took her hands in his, and kissed her fully on the lips. "Me? Immoral? What do you mean?" Nancy felt a surge of electricity through her entire body, and she gave in to his advances. Afterward, with a flushed face, she told him off again. "Our poor babies are going to be completely traumatized before they're even born because of you. Our boys will take one look at their father and aspire to be just like him." He chuckled and puffed out his chest like a proud peacock, and Nancy laughed. They stayed in Houston for another 2 days, and then, once they had dealt with the company business, they returned to New York. When Norman and Sydney had gotten married, Norman had taken a 2-week vacation for their honeymoon. The newlyweds returned to New York and their jobs at the same time that Nancy and Jonathan got back. Ashley hadn't seen or heard from Latham for several days. Ever since she had found out the truth about his injury and why he had rejected her, she hadn't contacted him, and he hadn't gotten in touch with her either. They had started chatting to each other through social media, or with text messages every now and again. But Ashley hadn't heard anything from him for a long time. A month went by, and she felt despondent. It seemed that if she continued to ignore Latham, he would never speak to her again for the rest of his life. One day, Peter called and invited her out for dinner. Ever since she had hinted to him that she only liked him as a friend, he had asked her out on several occasions. But she could tell that he was slowly beginning to treat her more like a sister than a girlfriend. Recently, they had started to compete against each other in the online game Creation, and she had noticed that he would always introduce her to other players as his friend. So after work that night, Peter took Ashley to dinner at a new Thai restaurant that had recently opened nearby. Its menu was vast and more interesting than other Thai restaurants that Ashley had eaten at. On it were all sorts of lamb, chicken, prawn, beef, and vegetarian dishes in an array of flavors and degrees of spiciness. Ashley loved spicy food, and her mouth watered in anticipation of the meal that was to come. Both she and Peter were ravenous, and they ordered a platter that should have fed 3 to 4 people, but they managed to eat it all by themselves. After they had finished eating, they were full to bursting. Instead of driving straight home, they had decided to walk off a bit of their dinner, so they took a stroll around the shopping mall. The 5th and 6th floors were filled with restaurants, so they went straight to the men's clothing department on the 4th floor. There was nothing that Peter particularly wanted to buy, so they simply browsed the racks. But before long, he found an item he liked from his favorite brand, so he took it to the changing room to try it on. As he walked in, he bumped into another man coming out, and both men stopped in their tracks. Latham's heart leapt into his mouth at the sight of Ashley and Peter together, and in the shopping mall of all places. She's helping him buy clothes, he thought with a touch of jealousy. And they're laughing and chatting about it. Latham held the clothes that he had just tried on limply in his hand and smiled weakly at them. What a coincidence, seeing you guys here. Ashley smiled awkwardly back at him. Yes, it is. Are you alone? Peter looked around for someone who might be with him. Yeah, are you shopping by yourself? Before Latham had a chance to reply, Mavis came running up to him and hugged his arm. She glanced at Ashley and Peter and then spoke to Latham like a spoiled child. I just noticed that my favorite restaurant is closed tonight. She pouted dramatically. Don't worry, Latham said kindly. There are plenty of other places to eat. You can choose which one we go to later. The look of feigned concern melted from Mavis's face and was replaced with a bright smile. Then she gave Latham a peck on the cheek. Peter grinned. Is this your girlfriend? Yeah. Latham realized that making Ashley believe Mavis was his girlfriend didn't have the outcome he had intended it to have. Instead of the sense of closure he had anticipated, it only made him feel bad about himself. And seeing her with Peter just made him feel even worse. His heart felt as if it were being sliced by a knife, and he wished he could just turn around and leave. Peter patted him on the shoulder, still grinning. You dark horse. If I hadn't bumped into you today, I'd never have known. You've been hiding her. I haven't known you all that long, Latham said weakly. I didn't feel the need to tell you. Peter laughed. All right, if you're going to be cagey about it, I won't bother you any longer. He held up the garments he was still holding. I better go and try these on instead. Peter disappeared into the changing rooms, and Latham looked awkwardly at Ashley. He couldn't think of anything appropriate to say to her, so he just smiled, and he and Mavis headed to the cashier to pay for his new clothes. He hadn't wanted to go shopping, but it was Mavis's birthday, and no one from her immediate family was around, so he had offered to take her to dinner at one of the upmarket restaurants in the shopping mall. When they arrived, they had passed his favorite designer store, and he hadn't been able to resist taking a look inside at the new season stock. And that was when he had unexpectedly bumped into Peter and Ashley. After paying for his new jacket, he went back to Ashley. I guess I'll see you around. I guess so. She watched as he and Mavis walked out of the store, leaving her with a deep sense of emptiness. What exactly do I need to do to make him understand that none of this has anything to do with his legs? She wondered. She felt utterly hopeless. I'd like him no matter what. I just want him to tell me that he likes me too, and he wants to live with me for the rest of his life. And not out of any sense of guilt or need for repayment, but because he likes me for who I am. That would be enough for her. Peter came out of the changing room and found Ashley rooted to the spot, staring through the shop window, seemingly lost in thought. He looked around for Latham, but there was no sign of him. He sighed as he understood. He went to pay for his new items and then went back to Ashley. His movements broke her trance, and she jumped with surprise. Oh, when did you come out? Several minutes ago. I already paid for these. He held up his shopping bag. Oh, I'm sorry. I was distracted and didn't notice. They left the store and wandered around for a while, looking in shop windows. After several minutes of silence, Peter plucked up the courage to ask Ashley the question that had been on his mind. Are you in love with Latham, Ash? What? She was surprised by the question. She hadn't expected him to be so forward. I can tell you are. Have you guys talked about it? Do you remember the hunting trip that Jonathan organized? Even then, I could tell the atmosphere between you and Latham was a bit tense. Ashley gave him an apologetic look. You'd make a good detective. You've known all along, yet you've never said anything. I guess this means we're breaking up once and for all. He waited for a response, but none was forthcoming. I think there's more to your relationship with him. Am I right? He eyed her suspiciously. Don't you know when to stop? Peter was afraid she would hit him for discovering her secret and pushing it too far. So he took a couple of steps back, just in case. I'm right though, aren't I? He insisted. I'm not normally the kind of guy to make a scene. You know that. But I feel this one needs to be made. Ashley hesitated for a moment and let out a strong exhalation. Then, she told Peter what had happened between her and Latham, leaving out the part about her pregnancy. She explained that Latham's injuries were her fault, and she told him that Mavis was actually his cousin and that he had asked her to pretend to be her girlfriend because he believed Ashley wouldn't want him with lame legs. Peter listened in silence as she told her story. Then, with a shake of his head, he said as enthusiastically as he could, Well, it seems to me that the two of you are meant to be together. It hurt for him to say it. He had always believed that Ashley was the one for him, so it was hard to accept that she didn't feel the same way. They had first met more than 10 years earlier, so in his mind, it had been fate when their parents had set them up on a blind date. But I guess this kind of fate is meaningless when it doesn't work both ways, he thought sadly. I'm just going to have to settle for being nothing more than her friend. What do you plan to do? He asked. Ashley shook her head helplessly. He's usually quite easy to talk to, but once he makes his mind up about something, it's almost impossible to get him to change it. I don't think I have much choice. Peter thought for a moment. I have an idea. Go on. Ashley's eyes lit up at the prospect of a potential ray of hope. Men are generally quite possessive creatures. When I saw Latham earlier, he looked at me differently. We were just shopping, but he was obviously not happy to see us together. He paused for effect. What if we were to do something else? She eyed him suspiciously. What do you mean exactly? Oh, I don't mean that. He was amused by her reaction, but he was quick to dispel any misunderstanding. Although that would be nice. Hey! Ashley slapped him on the wrist. Who are you and what have you done with Peter? He laughed. All right, I'll stop teasing you. But seriously, I was thinking, what if we faked a marriage? We wouldn't get a license or anything. We'd just send him a wedding invitation. He'd be the only one to get one. And then we just wait and see what he does. Ashley thought about his proposition and felt that it made sense. It could work, but what if he doesn't do anything? Well, I guess we'll just have to consummate our marriage in front of him. Ashley punched him on the arm. Is that the way you talk to a friend? Peter ran off laughing and pretended to hide behind a rack of clothes so that she couldn't hit him again. When she found him, he came out. So, what do you think? Have you thought it through? If you want to go ahead, I can find someone to design a convincing wedding invitation. Okay, let's do it. But we'll need a picture of us. Peter took out his phone, switched to the selfie mode, and snapped a photo of them cheek to cheek. Latham found out that Ashley was getting married 3 days later. He had just come out of a meeting and was heading to dinner when his phone rang. It was Jonathan. After the initial pleasantries, Jonathan said, Latham, there's something you need to know. Ashley and Peter are getting married. Latham felt as if he had been hit by a truck. He froze to the spot, and he felt the blood drain from his face. He clenched the phone tightly against his ears. His throat went dry, and he couldn't make any sound for what felt like a long time. "The time and place has been chosen," Jonathan went on. "I don't know why they're in such a hurry, but the date is set for the 24th of this month, Christmas Eve." Latham finally found his voice. "Who are you talking about?" He knew what Jonathan had said, but he just needed to hear it again. "I'm talking about Ashley. She and Peter are getting married." Latham felt as if he was going to pass out. He heard a buzzing sound in his ears, and his vision blurred momentarily. "They're getting married in New Orleans," Jonathan went on, "because that's where they first met. You'll get an invitation in the post soon. We all hope you'll be able to come." After another long silence, Latham eventually made a sound. "Uh-huh." Then, Jonathan hung up, and Latham was left standing in the street, feeling numb all over. He was vaguely aware of his assistant talking to him. "Mr. Latham, are you okay?" He didn't respond. "Mr. Latham, it's cold outside. Everyone else has gone ahead. Shall we go?" But Latham still didn't seem to hear what she was saying. He checked the date on his wristwatch. It was the 7th of December, only a couple of weeks until Ashley's big day. The day that she would marry someone else. On the surface, it was the outcome he had hoped for, but deep down, it was breaking his heart. His assistant was beginning to get agitated, and she began pulling on his sleeve. Only then did he finally react. He turned to her. "What are you doing?" "Mr. Latham, the others have gone ahead to the restaurant already and are waiting for you. They've got a private room." "Of course." Latham pulled himself together, straightened his coat, and walked in the direction of the restaurant. He moved slowly. His ankle was sore and stiff from standing in the cold wind for so long, but he battled on as well as he could. Jonathan put his phone down and turned to Ashley. "There, it's done. I've told him." "Thank you." She happily grinned at him. "What did he say? How did he react?" "He didn't say much at all, but I think he said he would come." "Men are such idiots." Ashley scowled. "All men?" her brother asked. "Yes, except you." Just then, Harold came down from his room upstairs. He had arrived in New York just a few days earlier. He was holding a piece of paper, which he waved around excitedly. "Maria, Jonathan, I've thought of some names for the babies." Nancy glanced at Jonathan and rolled her eyes. "Come on then, Dad. Show us what you've come up with." Harold sat down and placed the piece of paper on the table in front of everyone. "So you and Jonathan got married in Tribeca," he said assertively. "The name is an abbreviation of Triangle Below Canal Street. Did you know that? Anyway, I digress." He paused, and Nancy looked at him in confusion, wondering how the place of their wedding could have anything to do with baby names. Harold went on. "I was thinking it might be nice to find 3 names that could come from the name Tribeca. So, I racked my brain and came up with the following. The first son should be called Tristan, from Tri. The second son should be called Callum, from Ka. And your daughter should be Rebecca, from Becca." He looked around the table at the faces staring back at him. "Well, what do you think?" For several seconds, Jonathan and Nancy looked blankly at him, but then Jonathan began to nod slowly. "That's actually not a bad idea." He turned to Nancy. "What do you think, Maria?" "Tristan, Callum, and Rebecca. I like it." Nancy took the piece of paper and Harold's pen and wrote the names in full. Tristan Davis, Callum Davis, and Rebecca Davis. She liked the way they sounded. She looked up at the others and smiled. "Sure, why not?" Harold beamed with delight, and he stood up and gave her a hug. "Thank you for indulging me, Maria. It means a lot to me." Ashley picked up the piece of paper with the 3 names written on it. I wonder what my baby names will be. Nancy gave her a puzzled look. I thought you were never even going to get married, let alone have babies. Ashley felt a little embarrassed discussing such things in front of Harold, so she just shrugged and said no more. Jonathan turned to his sister. So, Ash, since Latham didn't say much, are you and Peter still going to pretend to get married? Ashley felt a headache coming on, and she rubbed her temples. To be honest, I haven't really thought beyond this stage. I guess he hoped he would try to stop me as soon as he found out. Jonathan sighed. At first, he had been against Ashley and Peter's plan, but she had insisted. His acting skills were limited, so he had hoped they wouldn't be needed any further. But it seemed he would have no choice but to keep playing along. Ashley had arranged for a few close friends to go to New Orleans for the fake wedding. They couldn't invite any more than that. Seeing his sister's reaction, Jonathan patted her sympathetically on the shoulder. If he doesn't come, don't be too disappointed. He must have his reasons. He knew his words might seem harsh, but he felt that it would be better for Ashley to end things with Latham and try to move on. I guess, she said despondently. Days passed, and Nancy's babies began to move. At first, it felt like butterflies fluttering in her stomach, but as time went on, their movements became more and more vigorous. Christmas was coming, and on the streets of New York, people carried Christmas trees to their homes, and a festive atmosphere could be felt all over the city. In recent days, Latham's colleagues could sense that something wasn't. Occasions, he had gotten distracted during company meetings, and he had made a number of mistakes when negotiating with clients. Fortunately, his mistakes had been corrected in time, but his personal assistant was concerned about his mental state, and he devised a plan to get his boss to take some time off. When Latham said that he would work overtime, his assistant told him that the power company would be repairing the power lines over the coming days, so there would be no electricity or internet connection in the office. So Latham was forced to take leave. Ashley's wedding was in 3 days' time. He took out the invitation from his desk drawer and read it for the 100th time. The photo of her and Peter smiled up at him sickeningly. Latham put the wedding invitation back into the drawer. Although he had been sitting in his study all morning, he hadn't read anything or done any work. He ate lunch and laid back on the couch to rest. He let his mind wander and soon fell fast asleep. Latham had been suffering from insomnia for a long time and seldom slept well. He would often drift off to sleep and suddenly wake up. Whenever that happened, he couldn't fall back asleep again. He slept soundly on the couch until the late afternoon. When he woke up, he saw it was already dark outside. He felt disoriented and unsure of the date. His phone rang and he answered it. A business associate had called to invite him out for a couple of drinks. He said he wanted to introduce Latham to a friend of his who had just returned from abroad. Although Latham didn't feel like going out and socializing, being by himself only worsened his deep sense of loneliness. He reluctantly agreed to meet his business associate at a trendy cocktail lounge that had recently opened. He put on his jacket and picked up his car keys. As he drove out of the underground parking garage, he noticed that it had been snowing. It was quiet and still outside. Snowflakes gently floated to the ground, covering everything in a soft blanket of snow. It almost felt as if he was dreaming. He drove slowly along the icy road and gazed at the pedestrians walking hurriedly along the sidewalk. Suddenly, he saw a familiar figure standing outside a coffee shop. He hadn't seen Ashley since the day in the shopping mall when he had bumped into her and Peter. Peter had delivered their wedding invitation to his office several days later, and because he had been in a meeting, his secretary had received it on his behalf. Ashley was wearing a thick white winter coat. The long coat reached below her knees and accentuated her tall figure. Her nose was red from the cold. She stood at the back of the queue, waiting to order takeout coffee. He had seen her buying coffee from that particular coffee cart in the past. It was freezing outside, and she occasionally rubbed her hands together while waiting for people queuing up in front of her to be served. Latham found a parking spot and switched off the car's engine. He got out and leaned against the car to watch her. Luckily for him, he had injured his left foot, so it didn't actually affect his ability to drive an automatic car. He laughed at himself as he looked down at his crippled foot. Snowflakes spiraled downward and landed in his hair. The queue moved slowly, and Ashley's hair and shoulders were soon covered in snow. He finally gave in and reached for his umbrella in the car. Then, he slowly limped toward the coffee shop. Ashley was on her way to meet up with a few friends she had made when she had been overseas. They had booked a table at a fancy new cocktail lounge, and under her long coat, she wore knee-high boots with a black miniskirt. She hadn't planned on stopping for coffee, but her friends had heard that the coffee from that shop was amazing, so she had decided to surprise them with some. She had been standing in the queue for more than 10 minutes and couldn't bear the cold anymore. She exhaled slowly and watched the hot steam from her breath evaporate. She looked up to see the snowflakes and realized someone was holding a blue umbrella over her head. She turned around and saw Latham standing right behind her with an umbrella in his hand. He wore a gray woolen suit and a warm winter jacket. The snowflakes fluttered around them and landed at their feet. Her throat felt dry, and it took her a while to think of something to say. "What are you doing here?" He looked at her rosy cheeks and red nose. He wanted to hold her tight and warm her up. "I happened to be driving past when I saw you standing in the queue without an umbrella. I thought I'd stop and give you mine." He looked her up and down and noticed her neck was bare. He frowned. "Where's your scarf? You're not dressed warmly enough." She smiled at him. "I'm going out with some friends. Can't a woman dress up anymore?" He shrugged. "Yeah, of course." They stood in an awkward silence before Ashley thought of something else to talk about. "Are you on your way home?" He shook his head. "No, I'm also on my way to meet up with some friends." Ashley smiled. "Oh." Another awkward silence followed. Eventually, the queue moved forward, and only one person remained ahead of her. Latham hesitated before asking, "When are you headed to New Orleans?" She looked down at her feet. "I'm leaving the day after tomorrow." He smiled faintly. "I see." The queue moved again, and it was Ashley's turn to order. She ordered 4 cups of coffee and turned to look at Latham again. "Will you be able to make it?" Latham tightened his grip around the umbrella's handle. He looked at the ground and mumbled, "I have a meeting scheduled for that day. I'll try to reschedule it, but I'm not sure if it's possible." She nodded and turned away from him. She collected her coffee order, and Latham held the umbrella over her as they walked to her car. As she got in, she finally looked him in the eyes. "Thanks, Latham. Goodbye." He nodded silently and continued to hold the umbrella as he watched her drive away. He waited until her car disappeared before he closed the umbrella and walked back to his car. He sat there for a long time and stared at the falling snow. Eventually, he started the engine and drove off. His friends were already at the cocktail lounge by the time he arrived. His business associate introduced him to everyone and handed him a glass of wine. Latham sat on a couch and tried to enjoy himself. He usually had a good time when he went out, but even in the company of his new friends, he felt utterly alone. He put his wine down and excused himself to go into the hallway to smoke. Latham wasn't a regular smoker. He had smoked while in university, but had stopped when he had met Olivia. She hadn't liked the smell of cigarettes, and he had been so in love with her that he had quit smoking. He lit the cigarette and inhaled. He pinched it between his thumb and index finger and watched the smoke rise as he exhaled. The hallway was dimly lit. He took another puff of his cigarette and saw someone walking in his direction from the far end of the hallway. He immediately recognized Ashley, although she had taken her coat off. The miniskirt she was wearing accentuated her slim figure. She was on the phone and seemed not to notice him. Ashley had booked a private lounge for her and her friends. They had ordered a bottle of wine and she felt slightly tipsy. She had received a phone call from Jonathan and had left the private lounge to talk to him. As she walked down the hallway, she saw Latham leaning against the wall. The cigarette smoke blurred his face. She pretended not to see him, but stopped walking and continued to talk to Jonathan. She remembered that Latham had said he was also on his way to meet some friends. She chatted to Jonathan. "It's not necessary for you to be there. I'll go by myself and think of it as a vacation." She didn't see the point of having any wedding guests for a wedding that wasn't actually taking place. She only hoped that Latham would change his mind and go to New Orleans after all. Ashley's change of plan for the fake wedding surprised Jonathan. He listened to her carefully, but wanted to find out more. "What happened?" She sighed. "I bumped into him today. He told me he couldn't go to New Orleans." Jonathan paused for a few seconds. "Don't be so sure. We won't know until the last minute." Ashley shook her head. "I don't feel like gambling anymore. It would be best if you stayed with Nancy. I don't mind being by myself. As I said, I'll use it as a short break away from work." He realized she had made her mind up, and nothing would change it. "Okay, we'll stay here, but be careful and try to relax." "Thanks, Jonathan." She hung up and walked toward Latham, who was still leaning against the wall. She smiled at him. "Hello, Latham. This is a coincidence." He nodded. "Yeah, what a coincidence." She cleared her throat and pointed to a door at the end of the hallway. "I'm going to the ladies' room." He nodded again, and she began to walk away. He suddenly felt as if he couldn't control the emotions surging in his heart and called out to her. "Ashley, wait." She stopped walking and turned to look at him expectantly. Although there was only a short distance between them, to Latham, it felt as wide as the Grand Canyon. He hesitated before finally saying, "I can't make it to your wedding, so I just want to wish you all the best." She stared into his eyes and saw an intense sadness in them. He looked calm, but it was as if he was holding back from spilling his heart to her. She had never seen him like that before, and she felt puzzled. She began to breathe used her, and she didn't understand why he kept pushing her away. She forced a smile and did her best not to choke up. "Yeah, thank you, Latham." She turned around and walked away. As he watched her disappear from view, Latham put the cigarette between his lips and inhaled again. He tasted the spicy tobacco in his mouth and felt the hot smoke fill his lungs. He got very drunk that night. His driver took him home, and he staggered as he limped up to his apartment. It was Monday morning, and Latham's company had a shareholder meeting. Everyone waited patiently in the meeting room, but Latham never arrived. Eventually, his personal assistant decided to phone him. The phone rang several times before he finally answered. His voice was hoarse and soft. "Hi, Jeffrey." Jeffrey felt a chill run down his spine. Latham sounded terrible. "Are you sick?" Latham coughed. "Yeah." "Are you home? I'll cancel the meeting and call your doctor." Jeffrey explained the situation to the shareholders and rushed to Latham's apartment. He arrived a few minutes before the doctor and took Latham's temperature. He was feverish, and the thermometer shot above the 102-degree mark. Latham was weak. He hadn't eaten much the previous day and had no strength to stand. The doctor arrived and examined him. "It's a nasty cold. Fortunately, it's not a viral infection. He needs plenty of rest and must stay hydrated." He gave him an injection and medicine to break his fever. Jeffrey made Latham a small bowl of porridge and sat next to him as he tried to eat. Latham spent the rest of the day drifting in and out of sleep. Much later that evening, he finally had the strength to pick up his phone and look at the calendar. It was the day before Ashley's wedding. He assumed that she would have already arrived in New Orleans. He leaned back and closed his eyes. There was no more hope of there ever being something between them. it was too late. He sighed and called out to Jeffrey. "Buy me a ticket to New Orleans. I want to fly tonight." Jeffrey shook his head. "The doctor has told you to rest. You have a fever. Besides, we don't have any projects in New Orleans." Latham coughed. "Just do it." Jeffrey nodded. "Okay, I'll get onto it straight away." He picked up his phone and searched for flights, but all the airlines were fully booked. "There aren't any flights available. That's strange. Maybe there's an important event taking place there this week." Latham felt his heart sink. He wondered if it was fate's way of telling him it was too late. Ashley arrived in New Orleans in the early afternoon. The resort she had booked was situated on the city's outskirts alongside the Mississippi River. The weather was slightly warmer than in New York, but it was still cold. She had dinner at the resort's restaurant that evening. As she returned to her room, she was shocked by the sudden wind. It hadn't been too cold when she had arrived, but the temperature had plummeted, and she zipped up her windbreaker to stay warm. It was as if the icy wind froze her entire body. She looked up at the sky. Heavy clouds swirled around, and she felt the air pressure change. It seemed as though it would start to storm at any moment. She hurried back to her room and found a bellboy at her door. He rushed over to her when he saw her. "We've just received a warning about an approaching hurricane. It'll probably reach us in the next couple of hours. Please stay in your room. We'll send provisions to each room shortly." Ashley was surprised. "A hurricane? Are you sure?" She had only seen a hurricane once before as a young girl. She and her mother, Alana, had hidden in their basement and had waited for the howling wind to blow over their house. When it had eventually died down, they had cautiously crept upstairs and found their entire street in ruins. The experience had left a lasting impression on her. The waiter nodded. "Yes, it'll be here soon. It's important to stay in your room and not leave for any reason. We'll bring food and water in the next hour. I'm not sure if we'll have power when the hurricane hits. Keep your doors and windows closed, and the curtains too. Whatever happens, stay inside." Ashley's eyes widened as the seriousness of the situation struck her. "Okay, thank you." She went into her room and immediately charged her phone. Then, she posted her location and status on her messaging app and started to read the news. Several reports about the approaching hurricane dominated the news headlines. A few people posted videos and photos of the wind blowing over trees, with bits of debris flying through the air. As the evening wore on, the wind grew louder, and it beat against the hotel. At first, it gusted and howled, but soon, it started to clap and smack in the air. Ashley wrapped herself in a blanket and sat on the bed. She felt nervous and tense. Her phone rang, making her jump in fright. It was Jonathan. "Are you okay? I've just seen the news." She wanted to cry, but she didn't want him to know how afraid she felt. "I'm fine. The hotel told us what to do and gave us food and water. We have to stay in our rooms until the hurricane blows over. You don't have to worry." Jonathan sighed. "All of the flights to New Orleans have been canceled. I'll send someone by car, but it's a long way, and they'll only get there tomorrow. Keep your phone charged and call me whenever you need to." After hanging up, Ashley received a call from Brock. He was overseas and heard that Jonathan had sent someone to pick her up. He told her to keep safe and gave her a few words of encouragement to help calm her nerves. As the news of the hurricane spread, Ashley began to receive several messages and phone calls, but none of them were from Latham. She put her phone beside her and picked up the remote to switch on the television when suddenly, the lights went out, and she found herself in the dark. The power had gone out. The wind whistled and howled outside. She started to panic and reached for her phone to switch on the torch. She tiptoed to the windows and checked the locks to ensure they were tightly shut. She looked through the rain that was beating against the glass and saw the dark shadows of the trees bent by the wind. The wind was so strong that it seemed like the trees would be uprooted at any moment. She shuddered and rechecked the locks before hurrying back to bed. She dare not sleep and switched off her phone's torch to conserve the battery. She sat alone in the dark and cried. Latham saw the news about a hurricane approaching New Orleans shortly after his doctor had given him another injection. His high fever had broken and dropped to a low-grade fever. After seeing the news, he quickly got dressed and grabbed his jacket. Jeffrey stopped him at the door. "Where are you going?" Latham had planned to drive to New Orleans, but suddenly had a better idea. "Take me to the railway station." Thinking it was urgent, Jeffrey collected his medicine and drove him to the railway station. The high-speed train to New Orleans had been canceled because of the approaching hurricane, and the only train he could take would stop at a town about 100 miles from New Orleans. He bought 2 tickets and boarded the train with Jeffrey. He constantly checked the news reports along the way. He soon read that the hurricane had hit and the Mississippi River had burst its banks. Several areas of the city had been flooded, including the resort. They arrived at their station after a few hours and picked up the rental car that Jeffrey had booked. It was early morning, the sun hadn't yet risen, and the sky was dark with heavy rain clouds. The closer they got to the city's outskirts, the more congested the highway became with people trying to get in and out. They had hired an SUV and forged ahead along the flooded roads. As they approached the resort, Latham tried to phone Ashley but couldn't reach her. The area was flooded, and soon it became impossible to drive. The floodwater had reached the car's doors, and Latham began to worry about how deep the water at the resort would be. All he could think about was getting to the resort and finding Ashley. He decided to phone Jonathan. "I'm in New Orleans, but can't get a hold of Ashley. Have you heard from her?" Jonathan sounded worried. "My men arrived a short while ago, and the resort has been evacuated. They're on their way to the evacuation center to look for her. Where are you now?" Latham sent Jonathan his location. Jonathan then quickly sent him the address of the evacuation center. "You're much closer than my men. You'll probably get there first. Go and find her. She's by herself." "What do you mean she's by herself? Where's Peter?" Jonathan hesitated briefly before replying. "You'll know once you've found her." Latham didn't have time to think about Jonathan's cryptic answer. He got out of the car and began to wade through the water in the direction of the evacuation center. Jeffrey followed close behind. As they struggled through the water, a rescue boat came speeding up to them. The rescue team helped them aboard and gave them thermal blankets to keep them warm. The rain pelted down on them, and they were drenched. Latham still had a fever, and he didn't notice the cold. The boat picked up speed as it raced toward the evacuation center. The sun began to rise, and the sky finally lit up. The evacuation center was overcrowded with scores of terrified people. Suddenly, people started to cry in alarm as a loud rumbling sound filled the air. The wall of a nearby dam had burst, and the water gushed into the already flooded area. The water level began to rise quickly and flooded into the evacuation center. Panic set in as people scrambled to get to higher ground. Latham was stunned and looked around, unsure what to do next. A section of the evacuation center building collapsed. For some reason, his gut instinct told him to rush toward the debris. Jeffrey tried to stop him. "We have to get back to the boat. There won't be space for us if we don't hurry." Ashley woke up to find herself lying in a hospital bed. She looked around and realized she was in a large hall with several other injured people. Hospital beds lined the hall, and it was crowded and noisy. She sat up and tried to find a familiar face. She didn't know how she had ended up there. All she could remember was being washed away in a torrent of water as she tried to help a young man to safety. Her body hurt, and moving was painful, but she swung her legs out and stood up. She looked down at her bare feet and realized she didn't know what had happened to her shoes. She was about to walk toward the end of the hallway when she saw a pair of shoes packed neatly at the foot of her bed. She slipped them on, and they fit perfectly. She frowned, puzzled. A young man with his arm wrapped in a bandage walked past her. He stopped when he saw her and his eyes lit up. "It's you!" Ashley recognized him as well. He was the young man she had pulled to safety. They had escaped the flooded hotel and had waited at the evacuation center together before the dam wall had burst. She smiled warmly. "What a coincidence. Did you help me last night? I must have lost consciousness. I woke up here a few minutes ago and found a new pair of shoes on my bed." The young man shook his head. "No, someone else helped you. It was a man, and he was quite handsome." Her heart skipped a beat. "Did he say his name?" The young man shrugged. "He called for you but never said who he was." After a short pause, he added, "Oh, I remember now. He struggled to walk and had a limp, so he must have been injured." Ashley froze when she heard the young man's description of her rescuer. She was astonished. It was a long drive from New York to New Orleans, and she realized that Latham must have taken the high-speed train to get there. He must have left as soon as the news reports about the hurricane had been broadcast. Her thoughts began to race. He had still raced to find her, even though he had thought she would be with Peter. Her heart beat faster, and she didn't know how to feel. She looked at the young man with wide eyes. "I vaguely remember seeing someone, but I fainted. Did he bring me here?" The young man looked slightly embarrassed. "He found you clinging on a broken pillar and saved you. He carried you over his shoulder to the rescue boat. You saved me, but the current was too strong and you slipped. The water swept you away. Luckily, he came along and found you. The water was rising fast, and everyone was panicked. We all rushed to get to the boat, and I saw him lift you, but I don't know what happened afterward. The boat was full. Don't remember seeing him. But since you're here, I'm sure he's okay." She nodded and smiled faintly. An image of Latham struggling against the floodwater filled her mind. He had put himself in danger to save her. He had disregarded his disability and pain to find her and ensure she was safe. He had even been thoughtful enough to leave her a clean pair of shoes. She felt tears well up and quickly thanked the young man. She had to find Latham. She searched through the crowded hall and walked past countless hospital beds, hoping he would be there, but she didn't see him anywhere. She began to feel anxious. She didn't know if he had made it onto the boat. Anything could have happened to him. She also had no means of contacting anyone for help. She overheard a few people talking about the flood. The water had started to recede, but the rescue efforts continued. The news did little to ease her anxiety. She searched the hall again and went up the stairs to the next floor. She walked through each ward, but couldn't find Latham anywhere. Ashley's heart sank as she began to believe that something terrible must have happened to him. She turned down a hallway that led to a smaller room set up for minor casualties. As she scanned the room, she suddenly recognized a familiar face. It was Jeffrey. She held her breath and hurried over to him. Jeffrey smiled when he saw her. "Miss Porter, are you okay?" She nodded. "Yeah, I'm fine. Where's Latham?" Jeffrey was about to say something, but stopped before the words escaped his mouth. Ashley grabbed his arm. Her voice trembled as she fought back tears. "Where is he? Did something happen?" Jeffrey turned his head toward another ward, closed off from the rest of the room. "He's been very sick. He had a high fever 2 days ago, and the doctor gave him an injection. I stayed with him at his apartment while he recovered. But when he heard about the hurricane, he insisted on coming here. I couldn't stop him. His fever had dropped by the time we got here, but after being out in the cold and getting wet from the rain and the flood, he got very sick again. He's in a private ward now." Ashley looked at the closed ward doors, and her heart sank. All she wanted was for him to go to New Orleans, but she hadn't wanted him to almost die because of her. She took a deep breath and collected herself. "I'll go and see him. Can you arrange for something to eat? I'm sure he hasn't had anything for a while." Jeffrey nodded. "I'll see what I can do. There are so many patients here. I can't promise anything." He turned to walk away, but stopped after a few steps. He turned around to face Ashley again, and hesitated for a second. "Miss Porter, I need to tell you something. Latham doesn't have a girlfriend. Mavis is his cousin. It's a long story, but he does have feelings for you. He was anxious to get here when he heard you were in danger." He sighed and continued. "He injured his leg a while ago. The doctor said it would take years for him to recover. He pushed you away because he didn't want to burden you with his problems. He doesn't want you to have to take care of him." Jeffrey wiped his palms against his pants. "I don't know if I'll get into trouble for telling you this. I also don't know if you're still getting married, but I thought you should know. It hasn't been easy for him." He gave her a weak smile and walked away. She sighed and tried to smooth her hair before walking to the closed ward door. She pushed the door open, but the room was empty. A nurse walked past, and Ashley quickly approached her. "Have you seen the patient who was in here?" The nurse nodded and pointed to the stairs. "He left a few minutes ago." Ashley thanked the nurse and hurried down the staircase. She saw Latham walking toward the door as she got to the ground floor. He walked as if he was in a hurry. He limped badly and looked as though he was in pain. She thought about what the young man had said and how Latham had bravely rescued her. She wondered if he had overheard Jeffrey and didn't dare to face her. She watched him push the door open and step into the pouring rain. "Latham!" She quickly sprinted across the hall to catch up with him. Ashley pushed open the door and ran into the pouring rain. Her damp clothes were soaked within seconds, but she didn't care. Latham walked slowly because of his fever and his limp, so she quickly caught up with him. She grabbed his arm, forcing him to turn around, and then she looked him in the eyes. "Why are you leaving?" He didn't answer. The rain pelted down on them, and they could barely see one another properly. "Why did you come here, Latham? You said you weren't going to." He kept quiet. His face was pale and he looked unwell. His wet clothing clung to his thin frame. Ashley felt warm tears stream down her face. "There never was going to be a wedding. I wasn't really going to marry Peter. I came here alone." When Latham had left to find her, he had only been concerned about her safety. He hadn't even thought about her marrying Peter. He looked at her standing in the rain for him, just like she had done so many times before. His heart ached when he realized she had always been waiting for him. Even when he had rejected her and had used his cousin to fool her into thinking he had a girlfriend, she had been there. He felt as if his entire body was on fire. His lips trembled and his mouth felt dry. He couldn't make a sound. She glared at him through the pouring rain. "Even now, after everything that's happened, you still want to walk away?" She wiped the water off her face and slowly released her grip around his arm. "Answer me. This has gone too far. I can't do this with you anymore. If you don't say or do something now, I'll turn around and leave. Forever." She forced a smile and tried to wipe away her tears. She turned away from him and slowly started to walk away. Latham watched her and suddenly felt a sharp pain in his heart. An indescribable feeling of emptiness washed over him. He made up his mind. His shoes splashed in the puddles of water that had gathered on the ground as he went to her. He reached out and grabbed her by the wrist. She stopped walking but didn't move. He pulled her, and she turned around but lost her balance. She instinctively reached out and steadied herself against his chest. She looked up at him and waited for him to say something. Instead of speaking, their lips locked. Thunder echoed in the background as the rain fell on them, but she heard nothing. The world around her had become silent. She only felt Latham's warm lips pressed against her. He put his arms around her waist and pulled her close against his body. They embraced one another passionately, oblivious to the world around them. They forgot about the devastating hurricane, the cold rain that drenched them, and everything else. It was like it was just the two of them, and nothing else mattered. Ashley had never been kissed like that before. Even when Latham had mistaken her for Olivia, he hadn't kissed her with such raw passion. He wrapped his arms around her and held her tighter, as if he wanted their bodies to merge into one. She grabbed his soaked shirt and slowly slid her hands down his chest. She put her arms around his waist and held him tight. The wind howled and the rain fell. Water streamed down their bodies and gathered at their feet, but it seemed like nothing could make them separate from one another. A bolt of lightning flashed across the sky, and the thunder roared. It was only then that they came out of their trance. Latham slowly moved his lips away from hers and looked into her eyes. She stared back at him and saw a softness in him that she had never seen before. He sighed and pressed her against his body again. She listened to his heartbeat and felt warm tears on her cheeks. Her heart beat fast, and she knew they had finally reconciled. The rain became heavier, as if the heavens had burst, and lightning flickered in the clouds. Latham suddenly let her go. "We have to get inside." Ashley nodded. Latham still had a fever, and the cold rain wasn't helping the pain in his leg. He took her hand, and they hurried back to the building. They took the elevator upstairs and returned to the private ward where she had looked for him earlier. The room had a small private bathroom with a shower in it. Latham locked the door to the ward and pushed her toward the bathroom. "You can shower first." She shook her head. "No, you're sick. You shower first." He smiled at her. "Listen to me. Go shower." She nodded. "Okay, I won't be long." Ashley usually enjoyed a long, leisurely shower, but that day, she quickly washed her hair and warmed her body under the steaming hot shower before getting out. She dried herself off with a towel and realized that she didn't have any dry clothing. While she had been in the shower, Latham had searched through his bag for a shirt and had placed it neatly in the bathroom. Jeffrey had had the foresight to pack extra clothing in a waterproof bag before they left New York. When Latham had been hospitalized, Jeffrey had fetched the bag from the car and left it next to Latham's hospital bed. He had also quickly bought Ashley some shoes. He hadn't had time to get her clothes, but he had assumed she could wear Latham's. Ashley picked up the shirt, and her heart skipped a beat. She was sure it was one of his shirts, and she guessed that he had left it there for her to wear. She quickly put the shirt on and buttoned it up. The bathroom didn't have any mirrors, and she didn't know what she looked like. She also didn't have any dry underwear and looked down to see if the shirt covered her properly. Although she was tall, Latham was still taller than her. The shirt looked like a mini dress. She decided it was good enough and pushed the bathroom door open. Latham had been staring at the pouring rain through the window and turned around when he heard Ashley come out of the bathroom. He glanced at her, but neither of them said anything. His gaze swept downwards when he saw her long, slender legs. He suddenly felt dizzy and hot. He rubbed his forehead and mumbled, "You should dry your hair. I'll go shower now." He picked up a set of pajamas and hurried into the bathroom. The private ward that Ashley and Latham were in was small, but just enough room for the hospital bed and 2 chairs. Ashley wanted to sit down, but remembered that she was only wearing a shirt and no underwear. She dried her wet hair with the towel and felt slightly annoyed. The hurricane had brought a cold front with it, and it was freezing outside. Although she had just had a hot shower, she started to feel cold again. She rubbed her arms and legs to stay warm, but then she noticed a blanket on the bed. She tiptoed over to the bed with the idea of laying under the blanket until Latham had finished showering. As she lifted the blanket, Latham came out of the bathroom. She saw him and stopped, suddenly feeling embarrassed. He realized what she had wanted to do. "I'm sure you're freezing. Lie down for a while and warm up. We don't want you to get sick." Ashley felt awkward. "What about you?" She blushed as she realized that it sounded like she was inviting him to join her in bed. They had been intimate once, but it had been under different circumstances. Although they had been friendly, they hadn't shown one another much affection since their intimate night, and they had deliberately kept their distance from each other for a very long time. Ashley wasn't sure what to do because they hadn't figured out their relationship yet. Latham also seemed uncertain, but he walked over and pulled the blanket back for her. "I'll get you some warm clothing later. For now, climb in and warm yourself up." She felt uncomfortable in front of him wearing nothing but his shirt, so she quickly got onto the bed and slid her long legs under the blanket before pulling it up to her neck. She shivered for a while. Latham sat beside her on one of the chairs. He draped another blanket over his shoulders. She looked at his pale face. "How do you feel? Has your fever dropped?" He nodded. "The nurse gave me medicine earlier, so I'm okay now." She waited for him to say more, but he fell silent again. They suddenly heard a knock on the door. It was Jeffrey. "Latham, Miss Porter, I was able to find something for you two to eat. It's nothing fancy, but it'll help." A warm meal was most welcome, and Latham eagerly got up, opened the door, and accepted the bag. Jeffrey was perceptive and excused himself, saying he wanted to find someone to update him on the situation after the hurricane. Ashley and Latham were both hungry and quickly ate the warm bowls of gumbo. Just as they finished eating, a doctor came in to check up on Latham. He took his temperature and drew another vial of blood for testing. "You still have a high fever. I'll have to administer more medicine this evening. If all goes well afterward, you can be discharged tomorrow morning." The doctor was about to leave when he glanced at Ashley in the bed and frowned. "I'm not sure how young people behave anymore, but usually the patient is the one who lies in the bed, and the visitor sits in the chair." He shook his head before leaving. Ashley moved to the side of the bed and bit her lower lip. "Come lie next to me. There's enough space." She blushed slightly, but continued to look at him. He got up from the chair and sat on the edge of the bed. But as he tried to lift his leg, he suddenly stopped. Ashley saw him grimace. "Are you okay? Is it your leg?" He bent over and rubbed his ankle and calf. "Yeah." He swung his good leg onto the bed and slowly eased his injured one up. She looked at him with concern. "Are you sure you're all right?" Her worried expression reminded him why he had avoided her for so long. He lay back with his eyes closed and kept quiet for a few minutes. He cleared his throat and finally spoke. "I don't know how to deal with this." Ashley's heart sank. "Do you regret what happened outside in the rain earlier on?" Latham opened his eyes and rubbed his leg. "This is how I am now." She smiled. "You saved me from the floodwaters with your leg like that." He took a deep breath and turned to face her. His eyes were red and teary. "You don't know how I feel." He forced back his tears. "I don't know how to face you. You're young, beautiful, and smart, but I can hardly walk properly." He buried his face in his hands. "I feel so inferior." It was the first time that she had heard Latham sound so depressed. She had always known him to be confident and carefree. He started trembling, and he seemed weak and helpless. Ashley had been angry because he had pushed her away. She had been hurt and disappointed, and had thought there was no future for them, which had caused her a lot of suffering. She had wanted to move on and be free of the pain she had felt. But at that moment, she finally realized why he had pushed her away. It astonished her that he thought he wasn't good enough for her because of his leg. Looking at his shaking shoulders, she felt like her heart had been ripped open. She reached over and hugged him tightly. She didn't know how to encourage him, but she tried. "Please, you don't have to feel inferior. You're so good at everything you do. You're handsome, intelligent, and hardworking. You're also the head of a successful company and have an incredible sense of responsibility. I think you're amazing." She gently patted him on the shoulder. "That's what I think." Latham slowly raised his head. His eyes were red and his face was damp. "Every time I walk down the street, I feel people staring at me. They look at me with pity, and I hear them say, 'Look at that guy. So young and successful. But it's a shame he's a cripple.'" Ashley felt a hot tear run down her cheek. He looked at her. "I feel so helpless. It'll take at least 8 years to recover, if I'm lucky. I don't know if I can do that. I don't have the confidence. You don't deserve this. You're perfect. And I'm just a..." Before he could finish speaking, Ashley leaned over and hooked her arms around his neck. She closed her eyes and pressed her lips against his. She wanted to make him forget his problems and let him know she was there for him. Latham lay still on the bed as Ashley leaned over and kissed him passionately. "If anyone dares say something bad about you, they'll have to deal with me first." He looked at her in disbelief, and she blushed slightly. "Don't feel inferior. You have to believe that you're the best. I like you no matter what. Surely that proves how great you are." Latham held his breath for a second. Her words of encouragement and belief in him slowly thawed the ice in his heart, and he felt a sense of warmth and hope again. He stared into her eyes. "Are you sure you're not going to regret this?" "Yes, I have no regrets." Latham felt the gloominess that had weighed so heavily on his heart lift. He pulled her close and kissed her. They lay on the narrow bed, and she rolled against him. He propped himself up against her and continued to kiss her. Her shirt buttons came undone, but she didn't worry about it as she felt the warmth of his body against hers. Their bodies intertwined as the winds howled and the rain beat against the windows. They no longer felt the cold. It had been several months since that fateful night in the hotel room in Miami. Ashley had deliberately pushed the memory into the recesses of her mind, but at that moment, she remembered how he had made her feel that night. She felt her heart could burst as she allowed herself to give in to his warm passion. Ashley listened to her racing heart as she lay in Latham's arms. She remembered everything she had endured to reach that point and smiled. It was all worth it in the end. Latham held her tight and gently kissed her on the forehead. They were silent for a long time until he took her hand in his. He wrapped his fingers around hers and turned to look at her. "I love you." She felt her throat thicken with shock. She had never heard him say the word love before. Even when he had once told her he had feelings for her, he had just said that he liked her. He had never allowed himself to express how he truly felt. But their passion was undeniable, and they had an intense connection. They had given themselves to one another, and there was no more doubt. She lifted her head and kissed him on the cheek. "So, you promise not to let go of me again?" He smiled and put his arm around her waist. "Never again. Besides, you're mine now. Why would I let you go?" She blushed and bit her lower lip to stop herself from laughing. He shifted his weight so that their noses touched. "Let's get married." Ashley's eyes widened and she held her breath for a moment. Then she smiled. "Are you proposing to me?" She couldn't believe it. They had just acknowledged their true feelings for one another, and their relationship had just begun. The last thing she had expected was for him to propose to her while they lay in a hospital bed. Latham grinned. He hugged her tightly. "I'll propose properly soon." She laughed. "With whose permission?" He thought about it and laughed. "I'll ask both of your brothers at the same time. Or we can go to Brazil and see your dad if you like." She shook her head. "Forget it. There's no way I'm going to Brazil." Ashley and Louis had a good relationship, but since it had been established that they weren't related by blood, she didn't see it necessary to involve him. Latham nodded. "I'll speak to Jonathan and Brock when we return to New York." She blinked coyly. "That's up to you." He smiled as he felt an indescribable sense of happiness wash over him. He kissed her again and wrapped a coil of her hair around his finger. "I want to take you to meet my parents when we return." She giggled. "My brother said that you were quite the ladies' man, but I don't recall ever seeing you be romantic. Taking me to meet your parents is quite serious." Latham playfully pinched her cheek. "Maybe I'm old-fashioned. I like to do things properly with someone I'm going to be in a relationship with." Ashley narrowed her eyes. "Even someone who you wanted to push away just moments ago?" He propped himself up slightly and sighed. "I'm sorry. I never meant to hurt you." She shook her head. "It's okay. I understand now why you did. You don't have to apologize." He hugged her again and nuzzled his face against her neck. "It was all my fault. I promise never to do that again. I'm tired now. I need to sleep. Ashley ran her fingers through his hair, and his breathing became slower and more relaxed. Everything is going to be okay. Sleep now, she said. She closed her eyes and snuggled closer to him. He gently rubbed the part of her back where she had been hurt at the evacuation center. Does it still hurt? No, it's fine. She had forgotten about it. With his eyes closed, he took a deep breath. Don't go running around alone anymore. From now on, I'll go wherever you go. She smiled to herself and listened to him breathe as she fell asleep. When she was sure that he had fallen asleep, she opened her eyes and looked at his handsome face. He had lost weight, and his jawline had become more defined. She hadn't thought he would follow her to New Orleans. She also never imagined them finally finding each other in the pouring rain. As she lay curled in his arms, she felt his warm body against hers and his soft breath on her skin. They were together, and they would never be separated again. She closed her eyes and fell asleep. Jeffrey returned to the private ward as night fell to check up on Latham. He found him fast asleep with Ashley in his arms. He quietly placed a bag of clothing for Ashley on the chair and tiptoed out.